buried alive is undoubtedly one of the most terrifying experiences that none of us would ever want to face in our lifetime. Yet Barbara Mackle, the daughter of a famous American millionaire in the 1960s, was once buried alive for 3 consecutive days, enduring suffocating confinement beneath 50 centimeters of earth at 3 a.m. on December 17, 1968, at the Roadway Inn. Late that night, Mrs. Jane was staying in the hotel room to take care of her daughter Barbara, who was just 20 years old and ill at the time. Suddenly, a knock on the door startled the mother and daughter from outside. A man claiming to be a police officer announced that there had been a traffic accident involving Barbara's boyfriend, Stuart Woodward. Hearing that Stuart had been in an accident, Barbara and her mother were both shocked and immediately opened the door for the stranger at 3 a.m. The moment Mrs. Jane opened the door, 2 men armed with guns were already waiting outside and immediately rushed into the room. One of them used chloroform, a type of anesthetic, to knock Mrs. Jane unconscious and tied her up. The other pointed a gun at Barbara and ordered her to get into a waiting Volvo parked outside, threatening that if she wanted to save her mother, she had no choice but to obey. Barbara immediately jumped into the kidnapper's car for the safety of her mother. The kidnappers drove the vehicle to a remote pine forest about 50 kilometers away from the hotel. There, the 2 abductors took Barbara deep into an isolated, deserted woodland. At the site, Barbara was thrown into a coffin reinforced with fiberglass. Sized for an adult, inside, she was provided with some food, water, a flashlight, and a blanket to survive. Additionally, the coffin was equipped with a water pump and a ventilation fan to help her endure the suffocating conditions underground, or in case rainwater seeped in and threatened to flood the space. Barbara was then locked inside the coffin, its lid nailed shut and earth shoveled on top. She was horrified to realize she was being buried alive. No amount of screaming or begging could help her now. She was trapped beneath 50 centimeters of soil. Terrified and confused, Barbara kept asking herself why she had fallen into such a terrifying situation. Who were these people who had kidnapped her? What did they want from her? Barbara Mackle was a 20-year-old heiress, living a life so perfect it made many people envious. Her father, Robert Mackle, was a millionaire and a prominent real estate developer, running one of the largest urban development companies in Florida. Barbara was also a bright student at Emory University, one of the most prestigious private universities in the American South, and was dating Stuart Woodward, a wealthy and well-known young man on campus, admired by many girls at the time. 8 days before Christmas in 1968, Barbara's life suddenly took a horrifying turn, one that neither she nor anyone around her could have ever imagined. On December 17, 1968, Barbara began feeling unwell and went to the campus health clinic. The doctor diagnosed her with the Hong Kong flu, a deadly illness that had claimed over 1 million lives worldwide. Upon hearing the news, her mother, Jane, grew so worried that she drove from their home in Florida all the way to Atlanta to bring her daughter to the hospital. At that time, Barbara strongly refused to be hospitalized. She told her mother that she wouldn't be able to properly prepare for her exams if she stayed in the hospital. Left with no other choice, Jane decided to rent a hotel room near the campus to stay with her daughter and take care of her. But unfortunately, that very decision would unknowingly set the stage for a terrifying kidnapping that same night. In the middle of the night, when Barbara's mother woke up inside the hotel room, she immediately ran out and cried for help. Barbara's boyfriend, Stuart Woodward, was the first to arrive at the scene after hearing the news. He immediately called the police and notified Barbara's father. At that time, Robert Mackle was in the middle of a business meeting. Upon learning that his daughter had been kidnapped, he immediately halted all plans and boarded a private jet to Atlanta. There, Robert contacted then-President Richard Nixon, who happened to be a close personal friend. Moved by the urgency of the situation, President Nixon personally reached out to the director of the FBI and requested that he take charge of the investigation. Not long after, Barbara's family received an anonymous ransom demand from the kidnappers, who were clearly targeting the Mackle family's enormous wealth. Robert and his wife Jane were devastated when they were informed that their daughter had been kidnapped for a ransom of $500,000. Along with the demand came two specific instructions. Robert himself must personally deliver the ransom money, packed in a suitcase, to a designated drop-off location. Alone, he was required to place a discreet message in the Miami Herald newspaper, reading, "Dearest daughter, please come home. Your father and mother are willing to pay off all your debts to have you back." Immediately, Robert placed a response notice in the Miami Herald with the message, "Come home. Dearest Barbara, your father and mother are willing to pay whatever it takes to see you again." This message served as proof that Robert had agreed to the kidnappers' demands. Shortly after the notice was published, the kidnappers made contact with Robert by the early morning of December 19, 1968, 2 days after Barbara had been buried alive. The kidnappers called Robert Mackle and instructed him to drive alone to a designated ransom drop-off point, about 10 kilometers from there. Home, Robert arrived at the location, left the suitcase filled with the ransom money as directed, and then quietly left the area. The kidnappers would later come by to retrieve the money and make their escape. It seemed like everything was going according to plan, but that wasn't the case. At that moment, a nearby resident had called the police after noticing a few suspicious individuals lurking around early in the morning. A shootout broke out between the criminals and the police. The kidnappers managed to escape, leaving behind the ransom money and the Volvo car that had been used in the abduction at the scene. When Robert received the news, he was furious and accused the police of endangering his daughter's life because of their actions. He immediately announced that he would place another ad in the local newspaper, offering to deliver the ransom again, before the kidnappers panicked and did something to Barbara. Not long after, the kidnappers contacted Robert again and demanded that he deliver the ransom money the same way as before. This time, of course, there was no police involvement. The criminals were able to safely retrieve the ransom for Barbara at around 3 p.m. on December 20th, 1968, 15 hours after receiving the ransom. One of the kidnappers provided information about Barbara's burial location. The call ended, and while Barbara's family rushed to contact the police, more than 100 FBI agents immediately swarmed the area to search. Before long, they detected faint thudding sounds coming from beneath the ground. Calling out loudly, they held their breath and listened for any sign from below. But at first, there was only silence. As people began to doubt the information the kidnapper had provided, a police officer suddenly caught the sound of a weak voice coming through the air pipe. "Help me. Please don't leave me." Everyone quickly began digging away the soil around the area, while one police officer reassured her, "Barbara, don't worry, you're safe now." Barbara was pulled up from the coffin, pale but radiant, and miraculously unharmed, reunited with her father in a moment of overwhelming joy. Barbara was found to be dehydrated and had lost about 4 kilograms. But she was otherwise miraculously in good condition after being buried alive for 83 hours. She was flown home on her father's private jet to be reunited with the rest of her family. On December 24, 1968, then U.S. President Richard Nixon personally visited Barbara's home to congratulate her on returning safely. The hostage was now safe, and the FBI immediately focused on tracking down the kidnappers. The Volvo left abandoned in the woods during the first failed ransom drop became the criminals' fatal mistake. Inside the car, agents discovered Ruth Eisman Shire's passport, a photo of Barbara holding a sign that read, "Kidnapped," a collection of intimate pictures of Ruth and Gary Christ, along with a check and other documents that completely exposed the identities of the perpetrators. The FBI began gathering information on the kidnappers. In fact, by that time, 23-year-old Gary Christ already had a long criminal record, including multiple car thefts, various other crimes, and even an escape from prison. He had orchestrated the plan to kidnap a wealthy heiress for ransom. It was known that Gary worked as a ventilation box builder for the University of Miami in Florida, and with that experience, he was able to design an improvised ventilation system like the one inside the burial box. According to co-workers, he also had a girlfriend named Ruth Eismanshire, a 26-year-old who likewise worked at the University of Miami. Notably, both of them had vanished without a trace around the same time. Thus, the police were able to make an initial prediction. Gary and Ruth were the two who had kidnapped Barbara, and immediately issued arrest warrants for them, acting on a tip from a marina manager who reported seeing a suspicious man passing by the boat slips, claiming to have lost the registration papers for the motorboat he was operating. Authorities quickly organized a water pursuit based on the intelligence received. Eventually, they caught Gary hiding in a swamp in the state of Florida. On his motorboat, police recovered a large amount of cash and $20 bills. As for Ruth, she was far more elusive. She became the first woman in history to be placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. But justice would prevail in the end. 79 days after the kidnapping, Ruth was arrested in the state of Oklahoma. By then, she no longer bore any trace of the university scholar she once was, reduced to a desperate woman, struggling to apply for a job at a car dealership. Ruth was extradited to Georgia to stand trial, the same place where Gary's trial was held. The prosecution accused Gary and his girlfriend of conspiring to kidnap Barbara, having stalked her for months beforehand. The defendants specifically chose Barbara because she met several of their criteria. She came from a wealthy family, possessed strong mental resilience, and in their estimation, would be capable of enduring being buried alive in 1969. Gary tried to feign insanity before the court-appointed psychologist, but was still found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. As for Ruth, she claimed she committed the crime out of blind love for her boyfriend and received a 7-year prison sentence. After serving 4 years, Ruth was granted early release and deported back to her native Honduras. In contrast, during the mid-1970s, Gary became a model prisoner by participating in emergency medical training programs and working in the prison infirmary. He also began corresponding with prison system administrators, gradually building a relationship with Tommy Morris, the chairman of the Georgia State Parole Board. More than a decade after the kidnapping, Gary was granted early parole at the age of 33, and he set his sights on attending medical school. When he applied for medical school, problems arose because of his serious criminal record. Gary was able to gain admission thanks to the support of Chairman Morris, who helped him secure a pardon from the governor of Georgia. He later got married, graduated from medical school, and worked as a doctor in the state of Indiana. However, it seemed that old habits die hard. In 2003, his medical license was revoked after authorities discovered he had concealed his criminal past, continuing his long, troubled path of wrongdoing. 3 years later, Gary was caught smuggling illegal immigrants and trafficking cocaine into the United States. He was sentenced to nearly 4 years in prison. Despite being intelligent, cunning, and talented, Gary ultimately destroyed his own future, because greed, after all, knows no bounds. As for Barbara, she later married Stuart Woodward and settled in South Florida. Following a suggestion from President Nixon, Barbara wrote a book about her harrowing, once-in-a-lifetime ordeal, titled 83 Hours Till Dawn. The story was so gripping that it was later adapted into 2 different television films, one in 1990 and another in 2011. The story of Barbara is just one among many other bizarre rich kidnapping cases in the world, marking a sense of insecurity for wealthy people until the day they pass away. In your opinion, is it worth being rich but having to go through terrifying cases like this? Today's video ends here. Thank you all for watching until the very end. See you in the next videos. Goodbye.